Today we're jumping right back into GTMetrix, but this time to redesign the report UI that would be shown to you if you put a URL in the previous page. Now there's a couple of problems that I want to address in this UI, the main one being the information hierarchy. When I arrive at this page, my attention first goes here to this grade, and then it also kind of jumps around up here, and then gets pulled down here with all these colors and finally down here. And that's a lot of random eye movement. So instead of that, I want to kind of just have the information hierarchy flow down naturally. I want the most important information at the top, probably the grade, followed by a breakdown of the grade and maybe a little bit of metadata in here that's a little subdued. So we're going to tackle this UI in 3 chunks. The first being the main title area, the thing that draws your attention and shows you your overall grade. The second thing is I want to get metadata fixed. There's lots of metadata and lots of different places on the site. I just want to get it all in one place consistently. And the third is the issue breakdown here. This pulls a lot of visual attention because it's dark green and it's important, but it's not necessarily, I think, in the right place. So let's jump in and see what we can come up with. The first thing we're going to do is moving all the layout decisions that we made in the last episode into the new frame. Easy. Now we're going to start by building out this section here. We want this to be the main focal point of the UI, and it should pull my attention first and then down the page. And the things I want to see here are the grade, of course, and then just any important metadata that was relevant to this particular test run. So let's start there. And now that I have this list, I can go through and design a UI that does exactly this. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the overall score comes after the identifier. It just means that it needs to pull less visual attention than the former. When you're trying to craft a very specific visual hierarchy, it's important that you understand the things that do pull visual attention. And first and foremost, it's big bold text. That's right at the top, it will always pull attention. Just under that are large saturated colors like red or green or blue. And then below that, you're looking at shadows and other aesthetic treatments. I'll do a dedicated video about the visual hierarchy later, but just using all those tools in your tool belt to craft a very specific sequence of things that the user consumes is really important in UX design. Right now I'm realizing there's a couple of problems with the way that I'm displaying these metrics to the user. First of all, having this performance bar going across to the right, I think is just pulling a little bit too much visual attention. There's too much color here. And then these nested containers, I don't think this is the appropriate treatment. I think we should maybe use some kind of like boxed outlines or something, because it just feels off. It doesn't feel like a list of related items. They seem a little too distinct. So I'm gonna take another stab at this. A really great way to display visual statistics to the user without requiring a full bar or line chart is to use a little partial circle like this. And the arc tool in Figma is really good at allowing you to draw these sorts of shapes. And here I'm using it to indicate that we're 98 out of 100 for performance without the need for that full horizontal bar. All right, I think we've nailed the actual report items here, the individual metrics and the summaries. I'm going to make a couple more of these so that I can see what it would look like on a real report. And then I'm going to revisit the metadata up here because there's clearly a problem. I figured we could place the picture of the site that was audited inside either a desktop or mobile UI so that we could kind of indicate to the user that a particular site was audited on desktop or mobile, and also break up the monotony of the UI a little bit and add some cool, unique design flair. Alright, so there's still a lot of problems with this UI, namely I think the metadata here needs a lot of work. I'm not necessarily sure where we're going to put the actions either. I think we'll just kind of stack them here. And then we also have from the existing UI the speed visualization and the waterfall tab here that I haven't included yet. So these are just kind of ways you can visually look at how a page loads. And then we've also got the recommendations to include. So still a long way to go, but I think instead of tackling the metadata next, I'm going to try and find a place for these actions so that we can balance out the left and right here, and then subsequently revisit these metadata when I have a more cohesive header to look at. When you're dealing with action buttons, there's 3 useful paradigms that probably will work for you. The first is just putting them in the upper right and aligning them horizontally. This is a pretty standard and old school way of displaying actions. The second is the one I'm doing here, where you stack them vertically and in a sidebar somewhere. This is seen in places like Notion, where you're looking at individual item pages and stuff like that. The third is just getting rid of the actions altogether and using only in-context buttons. Now this works for highly interactive apps like Todoist, but for something like this where you're looking at a single item that's kind of a report, having the actions on the right for this standard object makes a lot more sense. Oh, alright, that took a while. That was really tough. I think we're at a point here where we have a really solid little action list over on the right. Here we can put like an arbitrarily long list of actions and still highlight one as the primary action without taking up way too much space and having inconsistent call to actions all over the place. So next, I'm going to tackle this beast. I'm going to take them on and get this metadata sorted. I really suck at metadata. It's a personal weakness, so I'm going to be leaning heavily on other design references here. When you're on an item details page, there are like 8 or 9 different ways you can display secondary information, also known as metadata. And because there's so many different ways to do it, it's often really difficult to just pick one that works. Sometimes if you put too much visual flair in there, it conflicts too much with the primary information, and other times you need a little more emphasis because it just doesn't make sense in that context. So I might do a deep dive on metadata later in a separate video because it's just such a challenging issue. But here I'm settling on icon plus text, which I think is appropriate for something like this, which is a report which you should be sharing with other people. Everything should be displayed clearly and labeled in context. I think we've successfully tackled the metadata here. It also helps that we added some breadcrumbs up here and some simple little actions. I think it helps break up the unstructured nature of the metadata that we had originally. So here I think we've got everything we need to know about a report, when it was generated, where the report was generated from, and then what devices were used. We've also got a brief synopsis that helps identify what we're looking at. Of course, the most important information is the performance stuff, right? But until we know what we're looking at, it's not that relevant. So this has to come first. I've also moved the image over to the right, and I think it helps with visual balance a little bit and breaks up the page in a way that makes a lot more sense. So now I'm going to go ahead and add in the visualizations of the performance view right here so that we can maintain more or less parity between the features in the existing app and the one that I'm redesigning here. Not really changing much about the user experience here. I think they did a wonderful job explaining the idea they're trying to communicate with this chart in the existing UI, just adding some more polish to this UI and tightening up the spacing a little bit. And then we're going to be adjusting the placement of this graph generally to make more sense in the user flow. I realized here that we were trying to squeeze just way too much into those cards below, so I'm taking the graphs out and moving them above the performance analysis. But by doing this, it means that I really need to have some kind of performance summary somewhere above this, because remember when we first decided on the information hierarchy, just a synopsis of the performance is so much more important than looking at the details. So we're adding this little snippet just above the graph as well, so users can get more or less everything that they would need without having to peruse the details. Now, before moving on to recommendations, I really wanted to play around with the visual hierarchy just one more time. That term visual hierarchy is starting to sound really weird to me. But I think that the main thing that users are interested in when they browse a site like this is right here, right? They don't necessarily care about very much anything else. The details are important, right? They're very important, but this is kind of what they're looking for. It's like the synopsis. So I think putting this right here below the initial details, here we've identified the site and now we've graded it. And now that it's been graded, I can dig into either a deeper analysis and see a timeline view or specific audit details, or actually just see recommendations. So we're going to go ahead and do this now and actually show what those recommendations might look like. Now, the reason that I broke up the analysis and the recommendations in the first place is because it seemed like there were two contexts in which these reports were meaningfully useful to the people that were generating them. First, they wanted to see what was wrong with their site, if anything. And then beyond that, they wanted to see, okay, what now can I do to improve the score overall, my page load speed? And given that they're two distinct use cases, it kind of made sense to separate them using the secondary navigation here. But another benefit is that since we have them in their own contained space, we don't have that same problem we did with the old UI with lots of colors from lots of different contexts pulling my attention. So now that we have this tab, I can assume that the user is only interested in recommendations here, and I essentially have a new visual hierarchy to work with. Alright, gonna take another stab at the metadata here because it looks weird, right? There's something weird about it. I can't quite put my finger on it. I think it's because it pulls too much visual attention and it's just... It's supposed to be the metadata, right? It's not that important, but it is. There's a lot of color and I don't like it. I'm gonna try again. Alright, there we go. I made a couple of changes off screen, namely I fixed the metadata, made the name of the site uppercase, and moved the notification, summary rather, to the top of the view here. And I think this does a lot to kind of pull the whole UI together. Not only does the uppercase make it very obvious what site I'm looking at, but kind of simultaneously you get to see this overview right at the top. So you're basically looking at this and you're thinking markmcdougall.com, I already see it's an A. I know high level, the site's fine. There's nothing I need to do with it. And then if you scroll farther down the page, you've got all the other details you could possibly need, bumping through the different visual analysis tools or just seeing individual audits, seeing all the recommendations in one place. I think this is really solid. You would get to this page, of course, from the reports landing page that we built in the last video. Go check that one out if you haven't yet. But hope you're liking the longer videos, folks, and I hope you're having a wonderful week. See you next time.